When two people secretly want each other, the world doesn't say it out loud, but the energy does. There's something haunting, magnetic, almost forbidden about the way two souls try to pretend they feel nothing, while their hearts scream everything. It's the kind of connection that doesn't need a kiss or a confession or even words. Because the truth hides in the silence, the stolen glances, the way your body reacts before your mind can control it. And if you've ever wondered whether the feeling is mutual, pay attention because when two people like each other, there are signs that can't be faked. Most people think attraction begins with words. A compliment, a confession, a flirtatious message late at night. But real attraction begins much earlier than that. It begins in the nervous system, in the eyes, in the pauses, in the way someone suddenly becomes hyper-aware of your existence without understanding why. Human beings are emotional creatures before they are logical ones, and that's why mutual attraction is one of the few things people struggle to hide, no matter how hard they try. The body always speaks first. The heart always leaks clues before the mouth is brave enough to tell the truth. And before we go deeper into this, I want you to do something honest with yourself. Think about one person. Just one. The person whose name instantly appeared in your mind while listening to this. The one you pretend not to think about, but somehow always do. If this video already feels personal, that's because emotional connection leaves fingerprints on memory. So stay with me until the end, because some of the signs we're about to uncover may explain emotions you've been trying to rationalize for a very long time. And if this resonates with you, if you've ever felt trapped in that confusing space between friendship and something deeper, make sure you like this video, subscribe, and comment below with the word energy. I read every comment because these conversations matter more than most people realize. I'm Maggie, host of Queen of Psychology YouTube channel. Now let's talk about the first sign that two people secretly like each other, and it's something most people completely underestimate. Presence. Not conversation, not touching, presence. There are people who walk into a room and you barely notice them. And then there's that one person whose energy changes the atmosphere before they even speak. Your posture shifts, your attention sharpens. Suddenly you're aware of your hair, your clothes, your expression, your voice. Your body begins preparing for connection before your mind even catches up. Psychologists have studied this phenomenon through what's called anticipatory emotional arousal. It's the idea that the brain reacts to emotionally significant people faster than conscious awareness can process. In simple words, your nervous system recognizes emotional importance before logic does. That's why your stomach tightens when they're near. That's why your heartbeat changes before your eyes even find them in the room. And the fascinating part is this. The same thing is happening to them. You'll notice subtle changes. Maybe they straighten their back when you approach. Maybe they suddenly become more expressive, more playful, or strangely quieter. Some people become more confident around the person they like. Others become nervous. But both reactions come from the same source, emotional activation. I once spoke to a woman named Elena who told me about a coworker she insisted she didn't have feelings for. Yet every morning she knew exactly what time he arrived. She noticed when he changed his cologne. She remembered tiny details from conversations weeks earlier. And whenever he entered the office kitchen, she suddenly became awkward, dropping things, over-explaining herself, laughing too much. One day, another coworker casually asked her, "Why do you act different around him?" And that question shook her, because she hadn't even realized her body had already confessed what her mind was still denying. That's the thing about attraction. It leaks. People can control words, they can rehearse conversations, they can pretend not to care. But the body is honest in ways the ego hates. Your pupils dilate, your voice changes tone, your breathing shifts, even your feet unconsciously angle toward the person you feel emotionally drawn to. These are subconscious signals rooted deeply in human psychology and evolutionary behavior. And eye contact. Eye contact might be the loudest, silent confession of all. There's a certain kind of eye contact that feels different from ordinary looking. It lingers just a second too long, not enough to make things obvious, but enough to create tension. Enough to make both people look away and then secretly look back again. That moment matters more than people think. Research from social psychologists shows that prolonged eye contact increases emotional intimacy and physiological arousal. In other words, the longer two people hold eye contact, the more emotionally charged the interaction becomes. That's why some glances feel impossible to forget. They bypass logic entirely and go straight into emotional memory. You know exactly what I'm talking about. That one look that replayed in your head later that night. That tiny moment that technically meant nothing, but emotionally felt like everything. And here's where it becomes even more powerful. Mutual attraction often creates what psychologists call selective attention. When you like someone, your brain unconsciously prioritizes them. In crowded spaces, you notice them first. In conversations, you focus harder on their words. Your memory stores details about them with unusual intensity. You remember the way they laughed at something stupid. You remember how their voice sounded when they were tired. You remember one sentence they said 3 months ago that probably meant nothing to anyone else. Why? Because emotionally relevant people imprint themselves deeper into memory. Now let's talk about something people rarely admit out loud: emotional scanning. When two people secretly like each other, they begin studying one another in subtle ways. Not obsessively, not obviously, quietly. You notice their mood shifts. You notice when they're quieter than normal. You notice the difference between their fake smile and their real one. And they notice yours too. This is why mutual attraction can feel so emotionally intense, even before anything romantic happens. Because both people become hyper-aware of each other's emotional state. And honestly, this can become exhausting. You start overanalyzing little interactions. Why did they sound distant today? Why did they leave my message on read longer than usual? Why did they smile differently when talking to someone else? The reason this happens is because attraction activates uncertainty, and uncertainty psychologically increases emotional obsession. Studies have shown that unpredictable emotional reinforcement creates stronger attachment patterns than consistent behavior. That's why mixed signals can feel addictive. Your brain keeps searching for certainty. And this is also why silence becomes so loud between two people who secretly like each other. A normal silence feels empty, but mutual attraction creates charged silence. You could sit next to each other saying absolutely nothing and still feel emotionally overwhelmed. Your mind becomes painfully aware of their breathing, their movements, their presence. That silence isn't awkward, it's loaded. And sometimes the strongest emotional moments happen in those spaces where nobody says what they're actually feeling. There's also something else people experience but rarely talk about: emotional mirroring. When two people connect deeply, they unconsciously begin mirroring each other's behavior. If one person leans forward, the other does too. If one smiles softly, the other reflects it. Speech patterns begin syncing. Energy begins matching. This happens because human beings naturally mirror people they feel emotionally safe with. It's a subconscious bonding mechanism. And when attraction is mutual, the mirroring becomes even stronger. Think about it. Have you ever caught yourself using phrases they use? Laughing like them? Adopting little habits you picked up without realizing? That's emotional synchronization. And no matter how much people try to play it cool, mutual attraction almost always creates nervous energy. Even highly confident people become strangely careful around someone they genuinely want. A man who speaks effortlessly around everyone else suddenly stumbles over his words around one woman. A woman who is normally composed suddenly becomes hyper-aware of herself around one specific person. Why? Because attraction raises emotional stakes. You care more about being perceived correctly. You care more about the outcome. And whenever humans become emotionally invested, anxiety naturally enters the picture. That's why people overthink texts from someone they like. That's why they replay conversations afterward. That's why they suddenly question whether they sounded stupid or awkward. It's not weakness, it's emotional risk. And one of the clearest signs of mutual attraction is this: both people keep finding reasons to continue contact. Not always in obvious ways. Sometimes it's random questions they could have asked anyone else. Sometimes it's sending you a meme that reminded them of you. Sometimes it's creating tiny excuses just to maintain connection. Because when someone emotionally affects you, your brain seeks repeated exposure to them. Their presence becomes rewarding. Dopamine pathways begin associating them with emotional stimulation. In simple words, they start becoming psychologically addictive. Now here's where things get complicated. Sometimes two people like each other deeply, but fear gets in the way. Fear of rejection. Fear of ruining the friendship. Fear of vulnerability. Fear of wanting someone more than they want you back. So instead of confessing feelings, both people stay inside emotional ambiguity. They flirt indirectly. They hint. They test boundaries. They wait for certainty from the other person first. And this creates the famous push-pull dynamic. One day they seem warm and emotionally available. The next day they seem distant. Not because feelings disappeared, but because vulnerability feels dangerous. I want you to understand something important here. People don't become emotionally confused around someone they feel nothing for. Indifference is calm. Attraction is chaotic. And maybe that's why these connections feel unforgettable. because they awaken parts of us we can't fully control. The desire to be chosen, the fear of losing something that was never officially ours, the hope that maybe, just maybe, the connection is real. And deep down, most people already know when it is. They just keep waiting for proof strong enough to silence their doubts. But proof rarely arrives through grand confessions at first. It arrives through patterns, repeated attention, protectiveness, nervous energy, lingering eye contact, emotional curiosity, the inability to stay emotionally detached. That's what mutual attraction actually looks like in real life. Not perfect movie scenes, not dramatic declarations, just two people trying very hard to act normal while their emotions quietly betray them in every interaction. And if you've ever experienced this kind of connection, then you know the strangest part of all. Even when nothing officially happens, it still feels like something happened. And once someone reaches you emotionally at that depth, forgetting them becomes much harder than anyone admits. Coming next. There's another sign that mutual attraction is real, and this one goes far beyond physical chemistry. It happens when conversations stop feeling ordinary and start feeling emotionally loaded. Suddenly, a simple interaction carries weight. A normal, "How was your day?" feels intimate. A random late-night conversation somehow turns into a discussion about childhood memories, fears, dreams, heartbreaks, and the parts of yourself you usually keep hidden from the world. That shift is never accidental. Most people spend their lives communicating on autopilot. Surface-level responses, predictable scripts, emotionally guarded conversations designed to keep vulnerability at a safe distance. But when two people genuinely like each other, emotional walls begin lowering without either person fully realizing it. And here's the psychological reason why. Attraction creates emotional curiosity. You don't just want to look at them. You want to understand them. You want to know what hurt them, what shaped them, what makes them feel alive when nobody's watching. And when someone starts revealing those private layers to you, that's not casual behavior. That's emotional trust forming in real time. I remember reading about a study where researchers found that emotional self-disclosure significantly increases feelings of closeness between two people. In simple words, vulnerability creates connection faster than almost anything else. That's why two people can talk for hours and feel emotionally attached afterward, even if nothing romantic officially happened. And honestly, some of the deepest emotional connections begin exactly this way. Not with flirting, not with physical attraction, but with one conversation that suddenly feels different from all the others. Maybe you've experienced this yourself. You start talking to someone and somehow the conversation never feels forced. Hours disappear. You tell yourself, "We're just talking," but afterward you can't stop thinking about them. That's because emotional intimacy activates the same reward systems in the brain that physical attraction does. Feeling emotionally understood is psychologically powerful. Human beings crave recognition at a soul level. We want someone to see the version of us that the world usually misses. And when someone listens to you with genuine attention, something inside you softens. That's why mutual attraction often reveals itself through listening patterns. They remember things, not just big things, tiny things. The coffee you said you liked once 3 weeks ago. The movie you mentioned as a child. The stressful meeting you were nervous about. The random story you assumed they forgot. But they didn't forget because emotionally invested people pay attention differently. And you do the same when you secretly care about someone. You remember details your brain normally would have discarded because attraction changes memory prioritization. Emotionally significant information gets stored deeper. This is also why people in mutual attraction dynamics often feel strangely seen by each other. They notice details others overlook. You seem quieter today. You smiled, but it didn't look real. You're acting like something's bothering you. Those observations matter because they reveal emotional attentiveness. And emotional attentiveness is one of the clearest indicators of hidden affection. Now let's talk about another uncomfortable truth people rarely admit: jealousy. Not toxic jealousy. Not controlling behavior, but subtle emotional discomfort. When someone you secretly like gives attention to someone else, your nervous system reacts instantly. You may still smile, you may act normal, but internally something shifts. You become more alert, more emotionally aware, sometimes quieter, sometimes unusually playful or attention-seeking. And psychologically, this reaction makes perfect sense. When we emotionally attach to someone, the brain begins perceiving them as emotionally valuable. So potential threats to that bond naturally trigger anxiety responses. It's not about ownership, it's about emotional fear. fear of losing connection, fear of becoming emotionally replaceable. And mutual attraction often creates this strange silent competition where both people try to appear unaffected while secretly watching each other very closely. A woman once shared a story with me about a man she worked with. They never dated, never confessed feelings, but every time another man flirted with her at work, he suddenly became colder and more sarcastic. At first, she thought he disliked her. Later, she realized he was emotionally reacting to the possibility of losing her attention. And the interesting thing is that many people express attraction through emotional contradiction. They tease you more, challenge you more, act distant sometimes. Because genuine attraction makes people emotionally vulnerable, and vulnerability can feel terrifying. Some people become softer when they like you. Others become emotionally defensive. But both reactions come from caring too much. That's why emotionally confusing behavior often appears in mutual attraction dynamics. People are trying to protect themselves while simultaneously craving closeness. And this creates emotional tension that feels impossible to ignore. You can sense it in conversations, in pauses, in the energy between words. Sometimes even other people notice before you do. Have you ever had someone ask, "What's going on between you two?" And suddenly you panic because you thought you were hiding it well. That's because mutual attraction creates observable behavioral changes. Even subtle chemistry affects facial expressions, body orientation, vocal tone, and interaction patterns in ways outsiders unconsciously detect. Now here's another sign people overlook: emotional prioritization. When someone secretly likes you, they make space for you emotionally even when life is busy. And I don't mean constant texting. That's not always a reliable sign. I mean emotional availability. They think about you during their day. They remember things they want to tell you later. Something funny happens and your name immediately appears in their mind. They see something beautiful and instinctively want to share it with you. Why? Because emotional attachment slowly integrates someone into your internal world. You stop experiencing life completely alone in your mind. They become mentally present even in their absence. And that's why these connections feel so difficult to escape, because the attachment doesn't disappear when the person leaves the room. Their emotional imprint stays active. This is also why certain songs suddenly remind you of them. Certain places feel emotionally charged. Certain phrases instantly bring back memories. The brain creates emotional associations around emotionally significant people, and those associations become deeply embedded over time. Now let's talk about silence again, because silence in mutual attraction is incredibly misunderstood. People assume connection requires constant communication, but real emotional tension often survives silence. Two people can go days without talking and still remain emotionally present in each other's minds. And then the moment communication resumes, the emotional intensity returns immediately. That's not ordinary interaction. That's emotional continuity. It's the feeling that the connection never truly paused. And psychologically, this often happens because unresolved emotional tension keeps both people mentally engaged. The brain seeks closure for emotionally significant relationships, especially ones filled with uncertainty. That's why almost relationships can haunt people longer than actual relationships sometimes. Because ambiguity leaves emotional doors open. You keep wondering what could have happened, what they really felt, what they almost said, and the imagination can become more emotionally addictive than reality itself. This brings us to another powerful sign: protectiveness. When someone genuinely likes you, they become emotionally protective of your well-being. Not in a controlling way, in a caring way. They notice when you're stressed. They worry when you seem emotionally drained. They become uncomfortable when someone hurts you. And this reaction often appears before romantic commitment even exists, because emotional attachment naturally activates caregiving instincts. You'll hear it in their voice. "Did you get home safe? You don't sound okay. Text me when you arrive." Little things, but emotionally meaningful things. And people who don't care deeply rarely sustain that level of emotional attentiveness consistently. Now here's something even more revealing. Mutual attraction often creates emotional courage in tiny moments. Not giant confessions, tiny risks. Maybe they sit closer to you than necessary. Maybe they find excuses to touch your arm during conversation. Maybe they hold eye contact just a little longer than normal. These behaviors are psychologically significant because attraction pushes people to gradually reduce emotional distance. Every small interaction becomes a test. Will you move closer or away? Will you respond warmly or pull back? Will you reciprocate the energy? And one of the most beautiful things about mutual attraction is this silent dance of reassurance. Both people are constantly searching for signs that the feeling is safe to express. That's why little reactions matter so much. The speed of your reply, the warmth in your voice, the enthusiasm in your greeting. Even tiny behavioral shifts can feel emotionally huge when someone matters to you. And maybe that sounds dramatic to some people, but emotional attachment changes perception. The brain becomes hypersensitive to cues from emotionally important individuals. That's also why rejection from someone you genuinely care about feels physically painful sometimes. Studies using brain imaging have shown that emotional rejection activates many of the same neural pathways associated with physical pain. The heartache is not imaginary. The body experiences emotional loss as a real threat. And honestly, this is why mutual attraction can become terrifying. Because once someone reaches your emotional core, they gain the power to hurt you without even trying. That's why people hesitate, why they suppress feelings, why they pretend friendship is enough even when their emotions say otherwise. Because vulnerability is risk. But here's the paradox. Avoiding vulnerability also prevents the connection from fully becoming real. And this is where so many people remain trapped. In the almost. Almost confessing, almost touching, almost admitting what both people already feel. But not quite. And the longer that emotional tension continues, the stronger it often becomes. Because suppressed feelings rarely disappear cleanly. They intensify in silence, especially when both people continue feeding the emotional bond through attention, eye contact, emotional support, and shared intimacy. Eventually, even ordinary moments begin carrying emotional weight. A goodbye feels heavier. A delayed text feels more meaningful. A compliment lingers longer than it should, because the connection has already moved beyond logic. At that point, the relationship may still be undefined externally, but emotionally, both people already know something important is happening. And the deeper the connection grows, the harder it becomes to keep pretending otherwise. There comes a moment in every mutual attraction story where the connection becomes impossible to dismiss as coincidence. Not because someone finally confesses, not because of a dramatic romantic gesture, but because the emotional bond begins showing itself in ways neither person can fully control anymore. And one of the strongest signs appears in something surprisingly simple: the way they treat you compared to everyone else. Watch carefully. People reveal their priorities through consistency, not performance. Someone who secretly likes you may speak normally to everyone else, but with you their tone softens, their attention sharpens, their patience stretches further, they become more emotionally present. It's subtle enough that outsiders may not notice immediately, but you notice it because you feel the difference every time you interact with them. You realize they respond to your messages faster than they respond to others. They remember things you said casually. They check on you without needing a reason. And perhaps most importantly, your emotional state affects them. If you seem distant, they feel it. If you're upset, they become concerned. If you disappear for a while, they notice immediately. This is what psychologists refer to as emotional significance. Once someone becomes emotionally important to us, the brain begins monitoring their behavior more carefully. Their moods start influencing our own emotional state. And this is why mutual attraction can feel both beautiful and emotionally overwhelming at the same time. Because suddenly, someone else's energy has the power to change your entire day. One warm interaction can make you feel euphoric for hours. One cold interaction can leave you emotionally restless all night. And if you've experienced this, you already know how exhausting it can be pretending not to care. Especially when both people are clearly trying to hide feelings they can no longer fully contain. Now let's talk about another undeniable sign: emotional hesitation during goodbyes. This one is incredibly revealing. When people feel nothing, leaving is easy. The conversation ends. The interaction closes. Emotionally, they disconnect quickly. But when two people secretly like each other, endings feel strangely incomplete. There's lingering, delays, extra comments that didn't need to be said, tiny excuses to stretch the interaction a little longer. Wait, one more thing. Oh, I forgot to tell you. Or sometimes just silence. Neither person moving first. Neither person wanting the moment to end. Psychologically, this happens because emotionally rewarding interactions activate dopamine pathways in the brain. And when the brain experiences something rewarding, it naturally resists separation from it. That's why mutual attraction often creates goodbye hesitation. Both people unconsciously try to extend emotional proximity. And honestly, some of the most emotionally charged moments happen right before separation. The final glance, the softer tone, the hesitation in body language, the feeling that neither of you actually wants to leave. I once heard someone describe this perfectly. They said, "The goodbye felt sad even though nothing bad happened." That's emotional attachment. And attachment always reveals itself most clearly at moments of absence, because absence exposes emotional dependence. When someone matters deeply to you, you feel their absence physically, mentally, emotionally. You look for their messages. You replay interactions. You wonder whether they're thinking about you too. And here's where social media has made mutual attraction even more psychologically intense. People now maintain silent emotional presence through tiny digital behaviors. Watching stories immediately, liking posts consistently, sending random reels, reacting to old photos. These small actions may seem meaningless individually, but emotionally they communicate something powerful. I'm still paying attention to you. Human beings seek connection in whatever form feels emotionally safest. Sometimes direct confession feels too risky, so people maintain closeness indirectly. And the dangerous part is this indirect connection often deepens feelings even more, because imagination fills in the emotional gaps. Now let's go deeper into something many people secretly experience but rarely discuss openly. Emotional exclusivity without commitment. This happens when two people haven't officially defined the relationship, yet emotionally they begin acting loyal to each other anyway. You stop flirting the same way with other people. You think twice before mentioning someone else romantically. You become emotionally careful with one another. And nobody explicitly asked for this behavior. It develops naturally because mutual attraction creates emotional attachment before formal commitment exists. This stage confuses many people because externally nothing is official, but internally the emotional bond already feels significant. And this is where fear becomes strongest, because now there's something emotionally valuable to lose. That's why many people stay trapped in emotional limbo for months or even years. The connection feels too meaningful to risk destroying, so both people avoid saying what they truly feel. But avoiding the truth rarely removes it. Usually it intensifies it, especially when physical touch enters the picture. And no, I'm not talking about dramatic romantic moments. Sometimes the deepest tension exists in the smallest touches. Their hand brushing yours, their shoulder lingering against yours, their fingers touching your arm during conversation. These moments matter psychologically because touch bypasses intellectual defenses. Human touch releases oxytocin, often called the bonding hormone, which increases emotional closeness and trust. That's why one tiny moment of physical contact with someone you deeply like can replay in your mind for days afterward. Your body remembers emotional significance. And mutual attraction often creates hypersensitivity to physical closeness. You become aware of every inch of space between you. Every movement feels amplified. Even accidental touches feel emotionally charged. Now here's something people don't talk about enough: the fear underneath mutual attraction. Most people assume attraction is exciting, and it is, if their presence calms and excites you at the same time. If every interaction feels emotionally charged, no matter how normal you try to act, then stop dismissing your intuition. Human beings are far more emotionally perceptive than they pretend to be. You know when someone feels different. You know when the connection carries emotional weight. And most of the time, they know it too. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this video spoke to something you've been feeling but couldn't explain, make sure you subscribe, like this video, and share it with someone who immediately came to mind while listening. And before you go, tell me in the comments, have you ever experienced a connection where nobody said the words, but both people felt everything? I'll be reading your stories.